So that was really good advice for anybody who has any kind of influence on a child of any sort. You know, whether it's your kids or your students if you're a teacher, or your nieces or nephews. You know, to help try to combat the influence of the media. Now, there are some psychological causes for anorexia that may or may not have anything to do with, media or anything like that. A lot of people who are diagnosed with anorexia also are diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. We call that a comorbid diagnosis, where we have these two things that oftentimes go together. It's not a guarantee. OCD does not cause anorexia. Anorexia doesn't cause OCD, but they oftentimes go together. And part of the OCD is that I need to be perfect all the time. So if the person is completely obsessed with being perfect, they may compulsively do behaviors that they think would be proof that they were perfect. And that in an anorexic would come out in the form of controlling everything that they eat. Setting up some sort of plan. I'll only eat my peas if the scoop that I have has an even number, or something like that. They may have these kinds of sort of rules that they make up about what they're willing to eat, how they can eat it, when they can eat it. And it may be that the eating disorder displays some kinds of obsessive compulsive components to it. Sexual abuse is a really common factor in the background of a person who develops anorexia. It's thought that maybe the anorexic is feeling like, if I can keep my body from growing and developing and looking like I'm an adult, then people won't look at me with sexual interest and things like that. So that's possible. It could be that it keeps their mind off of their memories of what might have happened in their past. There are a lot of different hypotheses about why those two things would go together, but they do see that in the backgrounds of people with anorexia, they oftentimes have that. Bulimia is the other eating disorder that gets a lot of attention, and that is where a person has binges where they consume like 1,500 or 3,000 calories at a sitting, and then they alternate that with some kind of purging. The most famous of which would be vomiting, but they also use laxatives to move it through their system faster, or diuretics to move it through their system faster, or maybe they engage in really vigorous exercise thinking they can work it off, something like that. Because of the purges, they consume so many calories, and the fact that the purge takes some amount of time, most bulimics don't lose significant weight. A lot of times they look like they've maintained the exact same weight, but then they'll start to show health effects. They start to lose their hair, their teeth may be harmed by vomiting, they may start to develop gastrointestinal problems from the laxatives and diuretics, things like that. So they may start to have health problems, even though it doesn't look like they have an eating disorder, because they haven't really lost any weight. The thing about bulimics is that they feel so awful after a binge, and so self-loathing, right? Like they just really criticize themselves and say, God, you're so weak and you can't ever do that again. You've got to be stronger. And they just get overwhelmed by that. And then when they get anxious in real life, or they get depressed, something like that, and that overwhelms them, then they think it'll make me feel better if I just eat a cookie. And then next thing they know, they've eaten the entire package of cookies. And they're like, holy cow, how did I eat all that? Well, I might as well have some ice cream anyway. And it doesn't even taste good or feel good while they're eating it. But they're almost like robotically having to eat it. And then they follow up with one of their purges to try and cleanse themselves of what they perceive as their failure. So the binge purge cycle kind of goes through, it's like a circle of hell, right? Where they are trying to adhere to a strict diet. I've decided I'm going to do this new grapefruit only diet. The diet slips, they eat something that's outside of the diet, or they're in some kind of, stressful time right now, and that can trigger them to binge eat. And so, one little slip, might as well just give up entirely. Or I'm under a lot of stress, maybe I'll feel better if I, eat something I like. Then they follow that up with a purge because they're hoping that binge isn't going to affect their weight. Then they feel all sorts of shame. They don't want their family to know that they've been doing this, or their friends. They think that they themselves think that they are awful, and they berate themselves for having had a purge and a binge. And that causes them to go, okay, that's it. I'm going to stick to my diet from now on, and it starts the cycle over again. So there's like this very predictable cycle that goes through with bulimia. Bulimia is a little harder to explain. The number one factors that people look at are media influences to want to lose weight, an incorrect belief that people who are thin are more virtuous than people who aren't thin, and then finally a sense of sort of, again, with that perfectionism, where I either have to completely stick to the diet or I'm a complete failure. And these are the two alternatives. There can be oftentimes depression tied in with bulimia. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. It's not quite as clearly linear as the anorexia explanations are, but there's a whole like syndrome of things that go together in people with bulimia. Now, what about drug use? I found a bunch of different statistics that I thought I'd share with you. This one's from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health from 2019. So this is like the most recent data that we have. We're going to have like this window where we aren't going to have any data probably to report for 2020, 2021, maybe even 2022, because life has not been normal. And so, to go out and actually use any of these things, typically adolescents have to like leave the house to find somebody who will get them alcohol or tobacco or marijuana. And so not being able to leave the house, I think our numbers are going to look strange. One of the things I want you to notice is overall, as the kids get older, they're more likely to use the different substances. Another thing I'd like you to notice is that most of them are not going after tobacco right now. Tobacco is quite shunned. So actual smoking with actual cigarettes or using smokeless tobacco or something like that in the form of, like Skoal or something like that, that is not very popular right now among teenagers. What you'll see is popular is alcohol, right? About a fifth of teenagers use alcohol by the time they're 16 or 17. And then marijuana. And again, it's almost as many using marijuana. And one argument for that is it's a lot more accessible to teenagers now that a lot of states have legalized it. Not for them though. It's not legal for under 18, but they have access to it more easily. You don't have to go like buy it in the bad neighborhood or something anymore, like it used to be. Fewer American youth reported drinking in 2019 than in 2020, which is great news. So we're seeing progress from education. We're seeing less binge drinking, which is great. Binge drinking is defined as consuming, if you're female, 2 or more drinks in an hour. If you're female, it's 5. If you're male, it's 5. The body chemistry makes it much more of a binge for a girl to drink than a boy because her body doesn't process it as fast. So we're seeing a reduction in binge drinking and heavy alcohol use, and also in how many 12 to 20-year-olds. Remember, in all states in the union, you have to be 21 to legally drink. So these are all people who shouldn't technically be drinking alcohol yet. So to see this drop is really encouraging. Now, looking at illicit drug use, we do have data from 20 to 21, and you'll notice we have this big drop. Like I was saying, it's possible that people just couldn't go out and score anything. So we had this drop because it's been pretty flat for the decade leading up to this, where 8th graders were pretty consistently, there's little bits of dips and little bits of rise, but pretty consistent. 10th graders, it looks pretty consistent. So I'm going to say that pandemic drop off is not probably going to continue once people get 10th and 12th graders get back out in the world. If we look at specific different kinds of illicit drugs that they may have used, and so you'll see in the red bars are things that are illegal for high school seniors and younger, and the ones that are in purple are things that can either be prescribed to them, like amphetamines. A lot of ADHD medication is an amphetamine base, or could be gotten over the counter. So the purple bars are things that are technically legal for them to use, but they're abusing them. The red ones are illegal for them to use. So we have, now this one is just high school seniors. So some of the ones that I'd shown you before were high schoolers or a range of ages. This is just seniors. And 36.4% said that they had used marijuana in the past year. And then it drops down significantly to any other kind of thing that they might be using. But we see the next little grouping would be amphetamines, synthetic marijuana, and I think a lot of times that's like in a vaping pen, and then prescription painkillers, and then we get this drop off again to like over the counters, cough medicine, but you're abusing it. Sedatives like NyQuil, like NyQuil if you're gonna, that one that's just for sleeping. Tranquilizers, these are potentially prescribed to someone else and you're consuming them. And then we're down to some more illegal ones, hallucinogens. That would include like magic mushrooms or LSD, something like that. MDMA, which is ecstasy, and then salvia, which is a much more recent addition to the synthetics. So we see marijuana for sure being the most popular among high school seniors. I think we can all agree to that. All right, something else that is really important to discuss with regard to teenagers is the potential that they will engage in sexual activity that could result in pregnancy, right? There are sexual acts that we can engage in that cannot possibly produce pregnancy, and then there are behaviors we can engage in that can cause that. So we're just going to be talking about, and we call that coitus in the business. I told you I teach human sexuality. We call that coitus, is the one sexual act that can result in pregnancy. So this is kind of comparing by around the world, and it's the number of live births per 1,000 women aged 10 to 19 years. And so the lime green that is, the U.S., Canada, Australia, India, there's a number of places there that are in lime green. That means that between 5 and 10% of girls between the ages of 10 and 19 become pregnant in a year, in 2016 in this case. The darker the color is, the higher the teenage birth rate is. The lighter the color, so like those, I'll call them cream-colored countries, have between 0 and 5% of their 10 to 19-year-old girls becoming pregnant in 2016. Now, just zooming in on our own country, here we have data from the CDC that shows the teen birth rate. Now, this is birth rate, not just pregnancy rate. So this is the percentage of teens who are between 10 and 19 who gave birth. And so you'll see that, Washington is in that color that indicates that it's between 6.6% and up to 17.5%. The two states that are hot pink, which means they're in the highest rate, are Arkansas and Mississippi. Mississippi? Alabama. Hold on. No, it's Mississippi. Yeah, it's Mississippi. They are mirror images of each other, so I get a little confused between Alabama and Mississippi. But Mississippi borders the Mississippi River, surprisingly enough, so I figured it out. This is from Health and Human Services Office of Population Affairs, and what this is showing us across time, starting from 1990 and ending in 2019, is across all racial and ethnic groups, we are seeing a drop in teen pregnancy rates. And it kind of goes along with what we were talking about earlier with regard to teenagers delaying onset of sexual activity. And then I think also the use of condoms has had a huge impact on teenage pregnancy rate. When I was in high school back in the dark ages, people who used condoms were considered like really promiscuous, like only really promiscuous people would carry a condom back then. And thanks to HIV, it became not only okay to carry condoms and be potentially prepared for sexual activity, but like virtuous. Like you were being a smart person. And so that has been a terrific change in attitudes about the use of condoms. So we've seen a reduction in STIs among teenagers, and we've also seen a reduction in teenage pregnancy. So these are good things. Yet we still have a number of unplanned teenage pregnancies. So I want to go ahead and take a break here, and we'll come back and we'll talk about, like what's wrong with a teenage pregnancy. Let's talk about that next.